Okay, so this month is all about stress because
we're starting new work. Tanya is going to go off on a new adventure, and I am going off on a new adventure as well.
And that can trigger all kinds of things between heavy codependency. It can trigger reemergence of addictions. It can trigger all kinds of things. So we're going to talk about stress this month and our new adventures. Hang with us.
Real life for real families. Hurts, habits, and hang-ups happen in every family.
Jerry and I are here with tools to help you trust God, clean house, and tell the truth to ramp up the joy in your family.
You have what it takes.
It's time to become sober on purpose
For his purpose.
All right. It is always a heavy responsibility when you decide to leave a job, switch careers, do those types of things. And recently, with my encouragement, Jerry has decided to leave his job. He was working 18 to 20 hours a day, and we haven't really seen him since November. So tell us about your exciting adventure and what's going on with you for that.
Already? I thought we were going to do like a big reveal later on down the podcast.
Nope. No big reveal.
All right. So what I'm going to do is we're starting a family trucking company. And by family trucking company, I mean I'm going to be doing all the work. Just teasing. But that is kind of the way it's set up because Tanya is got her own big reveal coming up. So what I've done is I've purchased a tractor and a trailer. I've established a motor carrier authority through the federal government. So we are our own motor carrier, and very much like JB Hunt or Swift or Werner. You've probably seen a lot of those trucks going down the highway. We are the same thing. But for the short term, hopefully, we are one truck and one trailer and one driver. And that's me. So I'll be working the spot market and trying to find loads and hopefully start to get to the point where I can work directly with shippers and broker my own loads and cut out the middleman and get some freight that's moving around really close to the house, which will allow me substantially more home time is the plan and a competitive wage.
And what we were finding with his current job is he wasn't home. He was completely stressed out. And it was showing up in all kinds of ways. You want to tell them how it was showing up?
Yeah, well, I was certainly very irritable and tired around the house. And boom, done.
Well, it was a lot more than that. He just wasn't available. He was completely checked out on what was happening, and he just could not handle anymore. Family life was he was non-existent. I don't know if we've talked about this in the addiction scenario that sometimes addiction can be workaholism. And this was not really Jerry's choice. It was just keeping the organization surviving. And that puts the person in the middle again, as we've talked about before, is that things have to function. You have to pick up the slack for them. And it causes a deep amount of stress. So what kind of stress were you feeling before you decided to let this go?
So it's hard to explain, but in the line of work that I am doing for another week, and I was doing for the last 7 years of my life, I had some very supportive bosses at the corporate level. My executive management was very supportive and very appreciative of the work and time that I put in. But my real bosses were the retailers that I worked with in the field. So City Market, Come and Go, Kroger stores, Albertson stores. And I had about 500 different bosses that would call me. The structure of my company and the area which we lived in made staffing and training very difficult. So we had a bunch of green staff, and we were unable to provide the level of support that our retailers were used to. And it became very stressful always having to field phone calls from dissatisfied or angry retailers, as well as, managing the dynamics of 22 employees.
And it really was upsetting your integrity as far as being able to do a good job. He was giving 18 to 20 hours a day, still couldn't be helpful to his staff, do the customer service he wanted to do for the retail people who are coming out for him. Talk a little bit about how that really kind of sends you down, really.
Yeah, you have a level of expectation that you want to meet, and it for me, people like me, I think it's just difficult to set boundaries as far as a work-life, home-life balance when, what's being done in the field isn't up to what you would expect if you were one of the retailers. However, knowing, at the end of the night that you've given everything you could, it just became very difficult for me to kind of set clear boundaries as to, calling it a day and wrapping it up and letting some things lie. I'm never really able to do that, nor did I have the support structure to achieve the goals that I had set for myself and that the company was setting for me as well.
And I think, again, we're talking about boundaries. How do you set clear boundaries? There was so much to do, so much work to have happen, and so many demands that it was almost impossible for him to set boundaries. And then he comes home, and I'm saying to him, the only place that you're irreplaceable is here as husband and daddy. By, I would say, February, we'd had enough as a couple.
I think that's about right. Yeah. February, I think we just decided to pull the trigger. I was unable. I looked for a long time in other areas of the market in the corporate retail world where I could make a competitive wage and try and strike a more balanced work-life, home-life balance. But what I was finding was that, that this was a corporate trend. This wasn't a company trend. And it was near impossible to find that. It was impossible for me to find options where, I could just slide into another job that that really cared about family structure and offered the adequate tools to get the level of service in the market that our retailers had come to expect.
So what kind of 12-step tools did you use to sort out the boundaries that you needed to make and to say, I can't, I either can or I can't?
I'm not sure that I was really good at it. But now in hindsight, one of the ways that I could have probably survived it a little bit better was to, keep it simple, just do the next right thing, manage the things that I can change. And
I'm going to jump in. I think you had been doing that probably for the last year as your staff was being cut. What do you think was it that really, in a 12-step program where you could have drawn boundaries and taking work as the thing you needed to draw boundaries around, what was it that brought you to the decision that you weren't going to be able to draw the boundaries you needed for you? How did you find the strength and the courage to do that?
That's an excellent question. I think it's like a person on a burning boat, and they're looking out into the ocean and they don't know where the land is or where they're going to lead, but they know that the risk becomes worth it after, the boat gets hot enough. And I could see, my forecast was that we were going to have a collapse, that the process which we had implemented was unsustainable, and it was going to get more difficult rather than easier. So, and the trend had been so long of 14, 16-hour days and still not being able to meet the level of satisfaction that I wanted to see in the market, to be able to sleep at night with a sense of integrity, that I just knew that it was time to take a chance. And, Tanya, bless her heart, got on board with my plan. It was a calculated risk to do this trucking company. I just feel that the market is as stable as it can be. I don't think automated trucks are going to be here next Thursday. Sorry, Elon, if you're listening. I know you're a longtime subscriber to our podcast, but I just don't think that that's going to happen right away. And if it does, as those changes begin to implement, we'll change with it and we'll liquidate and we'll find a way around it. But failure is not an option for this family, but it is. The bottom line is it's very stressful. There's a lot of risk. It is a tough decision.
Let's go back to setting boundaries. And when boundaries work for work, that's one of the reasons why we're doing this one specifically on work. They work for work. They work for relationships. They work for organizations. They work for habits, all kinds of things boundaries work for. And so Jerry did this responsibly. He got the people involved who needed to be involved, especially the family, making this decision. But he did have to set some clear boundaries, and it didn't include, we can work this out. And I think for codependents, that's one of the loops we get stuck in, is if we just talk enough, if we just handle it enough, if we just pretzel ourselves enough, we can work this out. And it had come to a point that working it out was not an option. That doesn't mean you have to get angry with anybody. It just means that you have to make a change. And the main thing I was on board with and felt a huge relief with was that this particular problem of working 16 to 18 hours a day and still not being able to get the work done was going to stop. Now, those of you who own your own business may say, Jerry, you're going to be working 16 to 18 hours a day owning your own business. And that may be true, but he is building the dream for himself instead of building the dream for somebody else.
Yeah, and also I'll add to that. It was like the tunnel before me was narrowing up until the day where we pulled the trigger emotionally and we knew that this was where we were going. Then all of a sudden, as the days progressed, the tunnel before me began to broaden. And I'm not under some pie in the sky dream that this is going to be all roses and lollipops. You know, we've done businesses before in this family and we know what's involved, but there's a lot more on the line this time because we are just making a transition into this as our primary source of income.
Which I think is terribly exciting. And so we have both kinds of stress. It was I think the most stressful part for me was when we were in limbo, when we didn't know what to do, to stay with the corporate organization, to do something separate, to hire a headhunter, to do something crazy different. I even offered to be the full breadwinner. That didn't quite go super well, but we made a decision. Once we made the decision, I think we were out of the worst of the stress.
I completely agree. You know, we were working with a coach not too long ago, and he talked about, was it FAST? Was that what the acronym was?
Forward. What was the acronym?
I think it was FAST or SMART. It was SMART. And the A stood for action. But then he also said, but, you know, in your situation, the A may be more suited to the word agreement. And once we had reached agreement with that there would be action in the direction that it was going to be, it did. I think that's what you were touching on, and I certainly felt a tremendous sense of relief.
And that it was like a watershed falling off of me. And that's where I think a lot of people who are relationship addicts, codependents, those types of things, where you're thinking you need to move for agreement. Jerry's company certainly didn't agree that he could leave. They would have kept him. They wanted to keep him. He couldn't move for agreement with them, but he did need to move for agreement with me. So that's where you need to look at who you need to move for agreement with. And maybe it's just with yourself on what is the best course of action. The other thing that I think is so interesting about this choice is, for me, I just needed him out of this job. I didn't care if he went back to cooking or 7-Eleven or whatever he did. He just needed to pop out of this job to get out of the inertia and do something forward. And I think he's done 100 times more than I would have expected in moving forward. Because the inertia, the suck of we were getting paid well, you know, he had a high level position, all those types of things. That's a huge suck that you weigh in and out.
With where we've become as a culture, health insurance.
Yes, the health insurance is a little bit of a worry.
You know, but you know what a great way to retain employees. You know, since health insurance has become such a competitive market, and there's really no options. It's either you have it all or you have nothing.
So we're still working through some of that stress, but as we're moving forward, we're in the positive part of stress. You want to talk about the positive part of stress?
Oh, sorry, I'm yawning. It's been a long day. I've already put in 13 hours, and now I'm just hammering out some podcasts here. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean?
He knows the positive part of stress is what keeps you up till 2 a.m. going, I know I can figure this out. I know I can make this happen. The
level of bureaucracy, which I've engaged in to become a motor carrier, get federally licensed plates, deal with all the mandates and bureaucracy, it's intense, and I've made huge gains, but I'm still looking at all of the things that I still need to accomplish. I need to finish setting up my drug testing consortium. I have to nail down my ELD program and get that test runs done. I need to still do the preventative maintenance on the tractor and trailer that we bought, because we don't really know exactly where we stand. So it's better to just get it done on the front side and be able to start a new starting point. I need to, I'm sure there's so much more. I need to outfit the rig. The stress now is to get to the level of where I know I can just run and to try and minimize the downtime between my last day and the first day of Going Mobile LLC. And because the the bottom line is I've gotten so much accomplished now that we are spending as a family $2,100 a month just not to operate.
But what I'm talking about, speak to the excitement builds. There is some stress level in paying the bills, but the excitement is a stress piece too that builds up, that makes you. He has 4 weeks vacation, and what are you going to do with that instead?
I'm going to work.
So it's just kind of this excitement of getting started and getting moving and making this happen. It's when you're creating something. That's the nice thing about having your own business is who else is creating this but you?
Yeah, no, it's true. And the buck, there's no doubt where the buck stops when it's your business. And, all of the things of the corporation that you work for, the unknowns and the financials. And we kind of really always try to, I think, paint a rosy picture. I know I do when I'm talking about the financial aspects of the company that I work for now that I can't see. Oh, well, but I know how it is probably. And I'm sure it's a whole lot easier from where they sit, but in reality, their budgets are probably just as tight as anybody else and their margins are just as narrow and they're just trying to make it through, to the next year.
So how are we stepping into this and how are we handing this over to God and saying, here we are. We knew we needed to do something.
Yeah, I always asking for clear direction and very rarely getting it, but I've come to my level. I've gotten to the place where I am in my life where if I'm not receiving clear direction in one way or another, then I've come to reside that this is something that God doesn't really have a strong opinion on. It could be something as simple as, should I wear a raincoat today, or should I take this, or it could be something as complicated or as risky as, should I take this job or that job? If I'm not getting clear direction, then perhaps it doesn't matter to God's master plan which choice I make.
And I'm a little more conscious in the sense that my theology says God is there and he cares about every decision we make. But I have had a work situation in my life to where I had everybody praying for me and the pastor's wife called me and said, the word she got was either one of these choices was good. So I think it was just about getting out of the situation we were in, of breaking that inertia and moving forward and dealing with the stress that was going to come. It has brought on some triggers. One of the things that I've needed to do is to back off and say, this is his business and I don't need to be in the middle of it. And he needs to do what he needs to do about that. And it brings on some micromanaging and codependency triggers. So I've done some things for myself as far as getting some massages and making sure my exercise routine stays in there. My eating habits are not so perfect, but in deep stress, those eating habits need to be even better. The other thing is we did a podcast last week about a counselor. I checked in with our counselor and sat with her, and she said, Tanya, to break this cycle, you're just going to have to sit with your feelings. You're going to have to sit in the bucket and see that you're not going to die. And that's where I am. I'm sitting in the bucket, dealing with the hurt feelings and the sad feelings and the grieving feelings and all those changing feelings of things we don't know. And I'm not dying, and God's there with me. What about you?
You're doing a good job.
How have you been managing?
Well, I've been picking on my wife and children and getting very irritable and staying up late at night. Unfortunately, I've reverted back to using nicotine, and some other negative things. But the positive ways that I've been dealing with it is I've been the thing about stress and fear is it can be a motivation for action. And it can also do the opposite. It can cause paralysis too. But if used correctly, or if implemented correctly, I think that's one of the real benefits to it. Is anger and fear, they motivate action.
And you can channel those, and that's where Jerry, I think, is, and that's what you're saying to me is. I can't take those 4 weeks of vacation as much as I need a break. I need to get our balance back up. We've got a significant portion of our life savings on the line, and I'm going to push you even further. I think you really need to see if it's going to work.
Well, it's going to work. The question is
how it's going to work.
Yeah, exactly. This is uncharted territory. I have done, I think, more market research than anybody who's going into this as green as I'm going into it. But you don't know until you don't know what you don't know. So I got to get out there and figure out what I don't know.
So he's at analysis paralysis, and as soon as he can walk out, the truck is ready to go here on April 13th.
Not quite.
Oh, we're not going to hit the target?
The list goes on. I mean, I got to put the graphics on it to be legal.
Yes, but that is the target date right now. You've put it out for hire
so
on the 13th.
I'm willing to accept offers to run the day after my last day. Odds of the truck being actually legal and ready to roll by then is minimal at best, but I'm willing to have brokers begin to call me and say, hey, where are you? Can you take this from X to Y on that date?
So that's another thing that we've touched on a little bit is perfectionism. And perfectionism is the road to inaction.
My favorite on that one is perfectionism is the enemy of done.
It is. It is. Perfectionism is just another way to procrastinate, and ask me because I know. And that's another thing that happens often in codependent relationships and addictive relationships is if I can't do it absolutely right, I'm not going to do it at all. And that's where I am with my new adventure, which we will talk about next time.
Oh, big reveal coming up next podcast.
We've talked about it a little bit in the past, but I have finally gotten over the analysis paralysis, and I have a client to start with on Saturday.
Oh, wow, we're learning this together, everybody.
Yay. So as we're wrapping up this part about stress, we would love to know about your job changes, about how you've managed stress, about how you may have slipped back into old habits. I am really trying to sit in my bucket instead of screaming at people. Jerry not doing so good with his chemical habits, but we all go through forgiveness, right? He needs an accountability partner. Anybody willing?
Yeah, I need a Christian coach. You know any good ones?
So we're going to leave you with that. We'll be back. And again, this month is about stress, how to deal with it, how to work through it, and when it is an actionable part of your life.
Gosh, this was a good podcast. I like how much we devoted on me. It was good.
So we are spending this whole month on stress and tips on stress and how to work through stress, and especially how to lay stress at the altar.
Yeah, that is a great point. I every time I'm brave enough to take my worries and stresses to Jesus and just say, look, I can't handle this. Can you take this? He's always been faithful about taking it. Unfortunately, I grab it back too soon, but every time I'm courageous enough to ask him to take it, he takes it in a very timely fashion. It doesn't make everything right, but it does take the stress away until I decide to pick it back up.
And we are going to keep bringing you a couple more podcasts on stress. And then guess what?
What?
We're going to talk about Christian coaching.
Fun.
I think it was the piece we missed with our therapy and building our relationship back. I think there was a piece missing there. And we're hopefully going to bring on some coaches to explain exactly what it is.
Sounds great.
All right. Where can they find us?
You can find us at thejoyousfamily.com.
Absolutely. So all the podcasts are there. Even the Elijah Thinks podcast is back up and running. We'd love for you to hear his.
It's so fun.
It is so cute. And we will talk to you next time.
Bye-bye.